Hello and welcome to The Art Dealer Show, a podcast about those of us who sell art and for those of us who sell art and anyone else who gives a damn. My name is Danny Stern and welcome to episode number 1. And I hope you listen to episode 00. It's really the opportunity I took to explain a little bit about what this show is going to address and where we hope it's going to go. It's 10 minutes of me babbling, but I think for some of us it's a worthwhile 10 minutes of me babbling. But on to episode number 1. On the show today, Jaffe. I've known Jeff, like a lot of the people I'm going to be interviewing, for a very long time. As a matter of fact, I met Jeff in voice before I ever met Jeff in person. This goes back about 20 years ago. We used to work for the same company. We worked for Martin Lawrence Galleries. Now, this is a Martin Lawrence Galleries of a different generation than the one that you're familiar with right now. This is at a time where we had literally dozens of locations, not just a handful of them, all throughout the country. And Jeff was a director in one of the New York locations, whereas I was a director in our San Francisco locations, actually a few Bay Area locations at the time. And every couple weeks or so, we would get on the phone to have a company-wide conference call with our boss. And he would kind of give us a State of the Union, if you would. But there would be this moment, this time, before our boss would get on the phone. And we could all hear each other as we waited. And I got to say, perhaps some of the funniest shit I've ever heard. It would be Jeff and his partner, art gallery director out there in New York, just riffing away, and the two of them would just crack me up out of this group of 30-plus people on a conference call. I fell in love with those guys years before I ever got to meet them. But I did. I eventually got to meet them, and it was in the version of my career that I now have, which is as a publisher and agent, and it was in 2002, just a little bit after 9/11, and that's significant because Jeff owns a gallery called Pop International Gallery. It's right on West Broadway, and once upon a time, you could look down the street from his gallery and see the Twin Towers. And the time that I was out there, it was just right after City was getting out of shock. But I met him after we had just signed on a new artist to our operation, one that I had worked with many times in the past, but now for the first time as an artist agent, and that was Ronnie Wood of the Rolling Stones. And we were putting together, with the folks at his gallery, what would be our very first art opening for Ronnie Wood under our management. And that was a beginnings of setting up the plans for a show that I will probably never forget. I was about to say we'll not soon forget, but I will never forget this show. This show, if you could picture it, was a show that by the time it got rolling and required us to set up a press pit in front of the gallery, that is something that I have yet to see since, and don't think I ever will in the future. A press pit containing Fox News, CNN, the New York Times, everybody in New York City you'd want to show up, actually willing to sit in a pit outside the front of a gallery. And down the street, a line literally wrapping itself around the block on West Broadway, heading itself down to Spring Street, a line of people waiting to get in to be a part of this show. The show was so intense that we had to let people in like it was the hottest nightclub in town. At some point, one of the representatives with the Rolling Stones insisted that the press had to go. It even involved Fox News crew, their camera crew, hiding in the basement of the gallery to avoid being thrown out when all the rest of the press was being kicked out the door because it was getting too overwhelming as a scene. And then later, for me, having to have one of the members of the handler's crew yell at me and say, "Who the fuck is in the basement?" and get rid of them. And I would have to go down there and literally try to drag out Fox News, which is something I'm actually kind of proud of. The scene got so intense. At one point, we decided we had to clear out the gallery so that we can bring new people in, because no one's leaving. It was a thing that we would later on learn. When you bring a rock star of this level into a room and you have a bunch of their most crazed fans show up, no one is going to leave until that person leaves, that star leaves. At one point, one of the owners of the gallery, not Jeff, but his partner Rick, stood up on a chair in front of the light switch and flicked the switch on and off. Actually, I don't think there was a chair, but he flicked the switch on and off. I don't think I've seen anybody flick a switch on and off to get an attention from a room full of screaming people since I was in second grade, and a school teacher used to do that. And screamed at the top of his lungs that everybody had to leave. We actually had to kick out everybody just so we could bring in a new batch of fans. That was the first bit of business I ever did with Jeff Jaffe. That was now 13, 14 years ago. And since then, we have done a lot together. We've even put on a private show for an ex-president, which is a story I'll get to, I'm sure, at a later date. But I think that sets the stage for the kind of experiences that the two of us had together. I've run God knows how many artists through his galleries, both good and bad experiences. So we've got some history. And that's why it was special. It was special to me to get the opportunity to sit down in his little office in the basement of his gallery and have what amounted to be, I think we went on for about 2 hours, the two of us talking. And even though this is a guy that I've known now for nearly 20 years, I got to hear stories from him that I've never heard before. I had no idea what the full background was of this friend. Some of the things that came out were absolutely precious to know about your own friend. But in addition to that, Jeff did a lot of thinking about where this business is going and where he's going in it. I found that he's in a very similar place to what I described about myself in episode 00 that came before this, the pre-episode, if you will, that he's there with a lot of us in this field, doing a lot of personal review about where he is in this industry, where he's going and where he feels the industry is going. And I think you're going to hear that in his voice. And without any further introduction, I'd like to bring you to that conversation I had with Jeff in his gallery in Soho on a Saturday afternoon, sitting in his office in the basement.
No, and the irony is, I don't think too many people can understand 9/11, which happened all those years ago, has still and does continue to have a profound effect on how people operate and run their businesses. I mean, we're still sort of coming out of it, recovering from it, if you will. But there are various. These are the things. These are the, what do we call them? The bumps. In the ride of owning your own business. There are always going to be things.
Well, we used to have a line in our business, after 9/11, which was every time we would make plans for something and try to get it all together, one of us, and I think Daniel started this, would say, that's all well and good until someone flies a plane into the building.
I know.
It's just like, we live in a world where we certainly, if we learn one lesson, it should be, anything could change radically at any time.
Yeah. It gets loopy. It gets loopy at times, and it could be anything. I mean, it could be staffing issues. It could be anything. The market does a tumble. It also, what also occurs to me is that this business, this art business, whatever we want to call it, some people call it a racket, some people call it a service, some people, it's certainly, we sell things that people don't need. But I always tell people that it serves a need. It fills a need, and it's not a need for survival. It's a need for harmony and beauty and the things that art is. But clearly, it's an industry that is not about buying shoes and food and clothing and shelter, and so we have to sort of get into that mode of understanding that what we do is something different. It's something special. And I know now, after 35 years of being in the industry, that where the loops are and where the bumps are, and honesty and forthrightness and, doing what one can do to sustain a business on any level is a difficult thing to do. But what we do specifically is a relatively more difficult thing to do than sell shoes or food, to some degree.
Yeah, well, it has pluses and minuses. I mean, one thing I remember acknowledging pretty early when I was selling art is, yeah, I've got my hand out like everybody else with these people, but I'm probably the only person today that had his hand out that wasn't related to something that was just depressing. You know what I mean? It wasn't a medical bill. It wasn't their plumber. It wasn't, the roofer or something like that, or taxes. I mean, at least at the end of the day, you got something pretty that you can be happy about. And
no, I still find it quite gratifying, after being in this business for so long, people 10, 15 years later coming in and saying, yeah, we bought this 10 years ago and we still love it. And, we moved and we've now got another, this, and we want to buy another that. And what do you got? And we get your emails all the time and we come to your openings whenever we can. And, those kinds of things about longevity, which is a difficult thing to build because it incorporates trust and it incorporates service. It incorporates communication. It incorporates a whole slew of things. It also incorporates a relationship with artists, which is sort of a difficult thing for many people to do. And I personally have always said I'm a lucky art dealer to some degree in that I sit on both sides of the fence. I went to art school. I studied art. I was a sculptor. I've sold my own art. I've had my own art in galleries. I know what it feels like. So the relationships that we've had with artists, if you really do look at our roster, the bulk of whom we represent have been with us for many, many, many years. I mean, 10, 15 years in some cases. And I work really hard at that because I think in the end, the relationship with the artist to some degree is just as important with my relationship with my client, my collector.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you represent a part of the art dealing that I really respect a lot, which is also taking a stand on something. And I don't mean in a political way, but you have art that you believe in, and you really represent it.
I do.
Yeah.
It sort of brings up two other things that come to mind. That Pop International Galleries has always sort of had this mandate somehow that whatever we do with a show or whomever we represent, there has to be some community tie-in, to some degree, a charitable organization, or we'll do a special event for a particular group or organization that will benefit from it. And usually our artists are totally game with that for that. I mean, it makes sense, and it besides the obvious publicity that it derives, that's not the motivation for us. It's this idea of being in a community, trying to sell material to a community, and if you're not part of the community, you sort of get lost in the shuffle to some degree.
I'd imagine that also keeps you grounded.
It does, because I'll be the first to admit, hand up here in the air, I have an ambivalent relationship with money. I'm not someone who feels the need to amass money. I feel that a business needs to serve a purpose and it needs to make money. There's nothing wrong with making money and sort of becoming prosperous. But it's what you do and how you do it that to me is far more important. And I've learned that because my business operates in a part of the stratosphere of the art world that is what I consider the middle market. Mm-hmm. We're not selling posters, and we're not selling $100 million Picassos. We're selling art to people who, A, don't know how to buy art or collect art, and we're selling art in a price range that serves a particular part of the market. And it's usually that part of the market that takes a tumble or a hit when something happens in the world. So when 9/11 happens, the middle market falls out. So it's been a challenge, I have to admit.
Well, we come from the same place. And at one time when we got into it, I think it was the most prudent place, which is you had a lot of people scrambling, for the very wealthy. That was a highly competitive world. And the middle market, though, was always something you could depend on.
Absolutely.
Which was, in this country, we always had an emerging middle class. And it's always been...
it's still emerging. You know?
It's emerging from something deeper now.
I mean,
you know, and it's always been this kind of tradition of, as you emerge, you created your own legacies, right, along the way. It's not something you inherited, you know, as you would from the European traditions, if you will. You know, you built that for yourselves, and this is what you were out there doing. You were buying, you know, the things that represented you as you came up: your furniture, your cars, your house, and then your artwork along the way. And I think that, you know, when they talk about the middle class dying, they're not wrong.
It's fascinating to me because I'm an immigrant, and my story is no different than your average immigrant that everybody's talking about politically today. I came to America with $100 in my pocket. It's actually fascinating to me when my kids roll their eyes when I tell them I came to America with $100 in my pocket, but I did. And what that sort of translated into over, you know, the last 30 years to me has become meaningful, not because of the day I remember taking that $100 bill to the bank that doesn't exist anymore and breaking that $100 bill knowing it's only $100, man. You're going to break this $100 bill. You're done. You better do something. 35 years later, looking at what a business did, you know, what we did. We've sent kids through college. I'm not talking about my own kids. I'm talking about people who've worked for us. I'm talking about the artists who we've represented over the time. How many millions of dollars have gone into the pockets of artists that had no representation before they came to pop. So these are the kinds of things to me that are meaningful relative to money. Mm-hmm. Not money meaning, you know, being that money itself is important, but what you can achieve in the sort of middle class market that we're talking about. And I chased it down heavily. And it is a struggling market in many ways. You know, we're watching a political campaign right now, and all they talk about is the middle class, but it's the middle class that really does have the hardest time of all.
I think they're struggling in two ways. I think the obvious, which is, you know, inflation has worked in a way, and lack of in salaries, and the increase in the cost of living, and all those obvious things, and medical expenses is a big one. And those are the obvious ones. But the other one is, I think, out of it has come a sense of panic and desperation, and a lack of a sense of, I can count on the fact that we'll continue to do better over the years. I think that if, as much as you were desperate at one time, or you got into a house you could almost afford but not quite, and you know, you felt that pinch and that kind of kept you up at night, there was still this optimism in the back of everybody's mind of,
well, the American dream, right?
Right. Well, time will come on and I'll get raises or a little bit better job or whatever, and you know, things will happen that will change my condition and it'll kind of even out. And we don't have that optimism now.
No, I totally agree. And part of what we've strived to do ostensibly, we have a policy here at this gallery not to sell art on the basis of investment. I have let sales consultants go when I hear them say, if you buy this, it's going to be worth this in X amount of years. It's because it's just something
weak anyway.
It's a weak argument, and it's a myth. It's a fib. It's a great lie. I mean, that's part of what we were talking about earlier about the notion of this industry being perceived of as a racket to some degree. The irony is that much of what we've sold to many of our loyal collectors has turned, their collections have turned into significant collections. I'll share a sad story. I have a wonderful collector who hit some hard times. And he called me up and he said, hey, any shot that we could run some of this stuff back through your gallery and see if I can, you know, it'll help me get back on my feet. And in no time at all, you know, the material that he had bought, because he'd sort of been advised properly what were good pieces. We always say, buy what you love, have the visceral reaction, and, you know what it is that makes your heart pound or your eyes well up with tears when you buy a piece of art. But the more you do that, the better you get at knowing what is valuable or potentially valuable, without my having to tell you that this is an investment.
I used to tell collectors that that's your insurance.
Yeah, I always to say I've got a really good stockbroker I could refer you to if you want to hear about investment.
That too, but I also used to say, look, do you love it 3,000 much? If you do, you're set. Yeah. That's the guarantee, because it could be worth zero in the future. But
absolutely.
But if you know you're getting 3,000 out of it, and you're paying 3,000.
Absolutely,
you've got a lot more coverage than any stock you'll buy.
Exactly, and we also tell people that it's really important to buy a piece of art that you love and can afford than to buy a piece of art that you don't love that you think that's more valuable that you can't afford.
Right.
So our argument is always sort of buy what you love, develop a relationship with the people from whom you're buying, and over time you will build a nice collection.
Well, you also have one big hurdle, which is your art has to pretty much double for you to recover it, right? I mean, you've got to get...
You mean as a consumer?
As a consumer. You have to get over the expense that a gallery is going to put on top of it to sell it, or you have to go out into the field and compete with the gallery.
Yeah, I know, it's funny. I how many times I've tried to explain to somebody what the difference it is between wholesale and retail.
Well, I've had this conversation, and sometimes I feel like a little bit more of a bastard than others. But when people say, well, at the gallery, this piece is $5,000, and why are you offering 25 or 3 or whatever? Well, you can go get that 5,000 if you want to go open up a gallery and staff it and learn the profession and advertise and do all these things. Right, exactly. But the unfortunate part of that is the art you bought at some point has to surpass that and its worth.
Right, it's a threshold that you know what it is? It's a physical threshold as much as it is an emotional or psychological threshold. Yeah. And so we've found, because we also have a policy here at Pop, not to inflate prices, to play that really ugly discounting game.
Put a 3 on it so you can sell it at a 2.
We just don't do that. And I'm very, very proud over the last couple of decades that the one thing that this particular gallery organization has become known for is that there's a limit, that we have to be fair with one another. We have to be fair with the artist who's involved. We have to be fair with the art consultant who's going to get a commission. We have to be fair with the gallery owner. We have to be fair with the person who's buying the piece of art. So there's this notion, I should have lived on a kibbutz and called it quits a long time ago, but it's this notion of fairness.
I don't see you as a farmer, but okay.
I think that my desire to have tried to run a business that has been one that really dealt with the notion of selling a piece of art from an ethical based point, knowing that I have relationships with the artists that we buy from, or the agents through whom the art comes to us. Those are long-term. Danny, how long have we known each other?
97?
No, a really long time. Yeah.
Not 97 years, by the way.
No, since 97. And I've known Daniel even longer.
Yeah.
So it's those kinds of relationships to me that sort of speak more of the value of what I do and how I spend my time, and reinforce, actually, when you hit those moments, those lulls where you go, oh, am I going to do this again with another 5 years? Yeah. I go back and I say, you know what? I've got great people that I've worked with over the years. They're wonderful relationships. Doesn't mean we're not going to take on new artists or move on or get rid of artists, or artists are going to leave us, because we've had a couple leave us for, I'll never understand why, but they have. The idea that there is a community of people that I've worked with over decades that I have a relationship with. Danny Stern walks into my gallery. It's hugs. Yeah, it's not just a handshake and a good afternoon, how are you? It's hugs and kisses and how's everything and how's the family? And that to me somehow is what sort of defines the nature of what my business has become. The people who work here, it takes a very short period of time for them to learn that culture, what our pop culture is.
Well, as long as you're honest, it's not a profession that you make a real fortune in. So yeah.
Dealing in the middle market, that's true.
Yeah, dealing in the middle market. But even a lot of the high-end market too. I think there's a lot
because
of
the margins are all so slim.
They're slim, and also I think in the high end, and trust me, eventually I want to get some of these interviews to start dealing with, the Mary Boones out there and such. It's a lot of kind of moment in the sun type of businesses.
Yeah.
They don't have long, even numbers. They get hits, and most of their hits are based upon they'll get one artist at the right time and a couple collectors at the right time, and they'll kind of get a ride. And those will be huge numbers, but I don't think they sustain in the same way.
In the long run.
At least, yeah. I mean, look, maybe they make their millions and they put it in the bank and the joke's on us, but they don't have a line as even along as we do. That is on a graph.
I would agree. Look, there are dealers on this planet who have become immensely successful. There's no question about it. How and why remains on lots of levels to be seen. But for somebody who runs a gallery, right? I run a gallery. And there are many of us. I had a conversation yesterday that there are close on 2,000 galleries in New York City alone. That says something. I mean, it says something about what exists in the market, what people are interested in, that there's an array, a broad array from which to choose. And the question is how you operate in that fray, because I think it is a sort of a war zone to some degree out there. It is about longevity in the end.
Does it get as rewarded, do you think, as much as it used to? And I'm not just talking about, how many dollars are spent in our business and how much is there, for us, but I mean
that's a great question.
The customer.
That's a really great question.
Because we've gone through a lot of changes. I mean, just in the time that you and I have known each other, the 18 years, that represents the time that the internet really came on as a big figure. That represents a couple big changes in the economy.
Well, the one thing I've come to learn about the internet, we all love the internet and we all fear it at the same time to some degree. What I've come to really and truly understand about the internet, and we have art on our website for sale. We haven't sold a single piece of art off our website, but the pieces of art that are on the website are selling. So what will happen is somebody will see it on the web, and then they'll come into the gallery and they'll say, I saw this piece of art on your website for sale. I'd like to see it. Mm-hmm. And I over and over and over again have come to understand that collectors or new time buyers or whomever it is, they like to smell it. They like to touch it. They like to feel it. They want to look at the frame. They want to, see how it's going to hang on the wall. And so we've become quite adept in a way, actually, at using the internet to help us, bring people into the gallery. But I found that one of the great things we do right now is we're all Photoshop adept. So somebody will send us a photograph of a wall inside their house, and we'll drop in variations of pictures for them. So a lot of European collectors have been in the gallery, and they've seen 2 or 3 pieces, and they can't really make up their mind. I'll just say, take a picture of the wall that you're thinking about, and we'll give me the dimensions. We'll scale it out. It doesn't matter angles. We can angle photographs, the images. We can do whatever. And we'll Photoshop it for you. You can see what it's going to look like in your house.
Right.
And it's turned out to be a remarkable tool. It does take some skill, and someone needs to learn how to, know how to use Photoshop in order to do it. But there are ways to use the internet.
Well, even go further, though. It doesn't just take the skill of working with the Photoshop, application to make that happen. It also takes the skill to gaining the attention of that customer.
And the trust.
And the trust.
The trust is everything.
You can't just do that.
No.
Someone can't just walk in off the street and, you say, well, how do I get a picture of your house and start dropping in pictures? That's a real job right there. And that's the one that never gets replaced by technology.
That's true. In the end, the vast majority of our relationships with the clients with whom we deal are long-term, ongoing, repeat. Yeah, we I'd say 40% of our business is repeat business, which is astonishing.
That's really big.
It's astonishing, and we've really worked at that. We have a lot of repeat business, and the location, of course, is important because of the foot traffic. But the rent is too damn high, and all the other stuff that goes along with it.
Yeah, and I worry about that stuff. It's funny when you mentioned the 2,000 galleries. I was prepared to hear something quite to the opposite, because from my perspective, it feels like we're having too few galleries in our business now. And once you start kind of identifying our little separate strata, just us folks in the middle, if you will, not frame shops, not the top edge.
Yeah.
it's a lot less than it used to be.
Well, it's about I would say, not counting the schlocky frame shop kind of gallery, it's probably about 1,500 galleries in New York City.
Yeah,
whether they're
I'm talking about national.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm saying just in New York City, and I'm not necessarily talking about street level. You know, there's a difference between a street level foot traffic gallery and someone who's on the third floor of a building somewhere. But it's a different model, and I think that is actually a key issue in this conversation. Is like, what is your gallery model? You know, how do you define yourself? And in terms of how one defines oneself, are you a third floor walk up or elevator gallery, or are you a street level gallery, or are you in a new and burgeoning neighborhood, taking the risk in the beginning, thinking, you know, that X is going to happen or Y is going to happen? You know, should we be moving to Brooklyn, or should we be moving to Jersey City? You know, or should we just be moving slightly east or slightly west, you know, because clearly we've seen shifts in New York City, particularly where galleries have moved to. You know, Soho became immensely expensive and Chelsea opened.
Yeah, one time Soho was the only place to have a gallery.
But Chelsea right now is for many people untenable. I mean, the rents are ridiculous. It's still a destination area, and the amount of money that people spend on spaces up there is almost akin to what, you know, they spend down here in Soho. It's obscene. It's just obscene.
So you might as well be in Soho.
So you may as well be if you can swing it.
Yeah, right. You know, if you can find a space and if you can get a deal, right?
Yeah. Well, what ultimately defines where you're going to have a space is what. Now, this to me is the key, really, thing about this whole conversation is what it is that you're selling. You know, what are your price points? What's your volume like? You know, who are the artists that you're really dealing with? You know, is it a one-shot, flash-in-the-pan kind of thing that's going to last for a year? Or do you have artists that you can, you know, have longevity with that, you know, run for 5 to 10 years or longer or never leave you kind of thing? Those are the questions that, to me, are the ones that I'm asking now. Because you well know, many of the artists that we have in this gallery have been with us for many years. Some have left us. We've had some experiences, mutual experiences. Danny, we're just little ants scrambling around on this earth.
Exactly.
I'm telling you, that's all we are.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
look, you know, I think that's also a fair point to be made, regardless of our being little ants scrambling about on the planet. I think being prepared to some degree is really important, if you can, as much as possible. You know, you mitigate loss because you can anticipate something if you've done something long enough. And then there's just you wake up in the morning one day and there's the shock of all shocks and you go, holy cow, you know, right?
And it could be anything. Absolutely anything. The first gallery I worked in, when I started, I found out after being there a couple months that they were getting out from being underneath the weight. When I say getting out, actually they were just in the beginning of it and they were going through the process of getting out of it for, I think it was a $1 or $2 million lawsuit from the estate from their main artist, who they were still representing. And they were kind of caught in this sort of sharecropper farm type situation almost, you know, where it's like, now you have to push as much of that art as possible to pay off the debt to get, you know, to these people.
Well, look, I think most small businesses to some degree run that risk. I mean, litigation, this is a very litigious country. I mean, as a foreigner, I'm like still blown away living here all these years, like who will sue who for what? It's just amazing to me. It's part of what we all deal with to some degree.
Let's go with that foreigner thing for a bit. Because there's an aspect of this whole thing that I want in this series of conversation. I don't want it to be just about business. I don't want it to be just about any one thing in particular. But I think the part that fascinates me most is who are the people who construct this industry? Because, you know, I'm almost afraid that there's a chance it's going to change form rather soon. It is changing.
Well, I think it is already, if it hasn't.
Right. And I think there's a culture to it. And either I'm identifying a very distinct culture, maybe for the first time, just by kind of documenting it. I'm possibly even documenting a culture that's on its way out. I think one thing that our generation of art dealers lost track of or never fully understood was we weren't coming into some industry that's always been around either. It was very new. And it's really kind of this post-war phenomenon.
So if I could jump on that one,
yeah,
because
right.
this notion of being a foreigner, it is actually quite astonishing to me within the last year or two how many dealers or potential dealers outside of the United States would like to replicate what we do in their countries.
We're seeing it in England right now.
Well, I'm going to name a few.
England looks like the 1980s in the United States.
I know. I'm going to name a few. England, I've been pounded on to try and get involved. Germany, no question about it.
Same thing.
And I'm not saying Berlin, because Berlin's a whole other mishegas on itself. But Munich, for example, is an unbelievably. It's one of the wealthiest cities in the world. It would be a perfect place to open a gallery, but they don't have the history that we have in the US or New York, to sort of run those kinds of galleries. Although there are many galleries in Munich. Dubai.
Yeah.
I have been hit up 4 times now to open a gallery in Dubai, and we're very, very close at this point to actually considering doing that.
I think, rather surprisingly to some, Dubai has a lot closer of a connection to who we are and why galleries work in our culture than in England or in Germany or in parts of Europe.
Yes.
I think this whole thing about a new place, new money, new traditions, emerging from old traditions.
Correct, because all these expats who live there are one thing.
Yeah.
But then there's this sort of local population that's got scads of money to spend and are seeing a model that could work really, really well. And as I say, Dubai for me is quite fascinating right now.
At the same time, though, Dubai for the past 10 years has become this kind of catchword that sends up my radar every time I hear it. It's like the equivalent of on the East Coast hearing about the strikes of gold on the West Coast. And, in reality, very few people are going to go there and really strike.
Well, it seems to me, from my research and the people that I'm speaking with, that there clearly is an opportunity. I'm not talking about opening up in Afghanistan, but I'm certainly, a stable place where there is an international, major, settled group of expats who live a very high quality of life. Whether it's focusing on expats alone, which I don't think is the way to do it, and introducing locals to what it is that they're interested in, because anything American somehow still seems to have this cachet, that somehow if it comes from America, it must be good. It's just fascinating to me.
I think that's got to be corrected a little bit too, because we
so.
often say that. I don't think it is, this kind of brand of quality. Not that I'm saying it's not a brand of quality. I'm saying it represents something more important. It also represents the new. But, okay, so I'm going to keep on rewinding you.
Yeah, okay, rewind me.
Because I want to get a little bit of your story, too. So how old were you when you came here?
So I actually left South Africa in the height of apartheid. I'd been arrested for anti-apartheid activities. I was drafted into the South African military. And when I was in the army, sort of did some things.
Their punishment for anti-apartheid activities was to put you in their military?
I was in the military, and it's a long story which we don't have to get into in great length, but I got arrested while I was in the military. It had mostly to do with my activity. And it didn't go very far, but I knew that were I to have stayed, I probably wouldn't be sitting in front of you here today. I had this conversation with my father a long time ago, that as opposed as he was to my having left South Africa, he was very pleased that I did, because he probably wouldn't have had a son. A lot of people disappeared, a lot of people were hurt, a lot of people were locked up. There are people today, we still don't know where they are. Anyway.
So did you really flee it when you left?
I boogied out. A week after I got out of the South African military, I was gone.
Wow.
I was 19 years old. I'm 55. I've lived more outside of South Africa than I have in South Africa, and yet I still have all of this South Africanness in me. You know, my parents still live there; they're aging. My brother lives there. I have a ton of family there still. So I got the heck out, not so much because I had ideology, you know, to go and live in some beautiful place somewhere or start a utopian whatever. I boogied because, in retrospect, looking back, I probably wouldn't be sitting in front of you today were I to have stayed. But I was 19.
That kind of puts a context in your entire life, for your entire life, doesn't it? It's like, as bad as things get or whatever, you know, you're not in that situation, and that's as bad as it's going to get, probably.
Look, it could have been worse, I suppose. You know, there are tons of people who had it worse off than I did, and I made it. My South African citizenship was stripped, I found out not so long ago, which is really interesting.
That must be kind of recent.
Yeah, I mean, I can, because I travel on a U.S. passport today, but I
remember you voted in the first Democratic presidential election.
I
in
voted
South
for
Africa.
Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, I think I talked to you that week.
I was so excited that week. I had my baby. She was little, and we put, you know, a picture of Mandela on her stroller, and we went up to vote. That day was a remarkable day. You know, thinking back now, I haven't thought about it in a long time, Danny. It sort of makes me a little emotional. Honestly.
I mean, how can it not? I mean, that's a big life full circle.
It was, and I remember, you know, we had to put ink. That they put ink on our fingers to show that we'd voted.
Oh, gee,
purple ink.
Even here at the embassy, they were doing that. Wow.
Yeah. There were two places to vote. You could vote at the embassy, and then you could vote, I believe, at the United Nations. Or if you couldn't vote at the United Nations, there's a big celebration at the United Nations. And so we walked up to the UN. I pushed my child in the stroller from the embassy to the United Nations, and man, there was a party going on.
Oh, I bet.
It was really, really remarkable. She was a baby, so she couldn't really appreciate what it was. I think both my kids. I think both my kids, as a result of their father having been this political animal, sort of have, I mean, the college my son chose in the end was just one of those really highly political places, and my daughter, having graduated from Georgetown University, which is a feat in and of itself. You know, you do all the heavy lifting with your children when they're babies. That's the whole point. And I think all the heavy lifting was done. I had an incredibly effective wife as a mother. We used to call her the Uber mother. She just, you know, the heavy lifting was done nice and early, and my politics and her, whatever it is that made her such a great mother, and I like to think I was an okay dad.
Well, that's a big deal, too, because you started this gallery with them being infants.
Babies.
Yeah. You know, at a time that you had to put in 12, 14-hour days.
Oh, longer than that, with no money and having to borrow money and, you know, scrape things together and sort of, you know, make those commitments.
I couldn't even imagine. I think part of the reason I never had kids is just that fear of being up every night, worried that I'm going to be able to, you know, provide for them. And,
Well, that to me has always sort of been like an honor, privilege, pleasure kind of thing. The bigger thing for me was, how the hell was I going to do it?
Yeah.
You know, working for people, taking jobs, doing whatever it was. I taught English to Russian students, and as a consequence, I learned to speak a bit of Russian. And, you know,
oh, that's where you got it from. I never knew.
Yeah, remember we talked about my speaking Russian. It served me well.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm okay with languages in general, so I speak a few, and it's been wonderful to have that ability in the gallery business, because so many of our clients come from all over the world.
It always pays off.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
it does.
I remember early on I worked with an art dealer who spoke German, and that was huge for him.
Yeah, it's been huge for me. I speak German, I speak a little French, I speak Russian, I speak Hebrew, I speak Dutch. You know, so I mean, it's been very helpful. And my kids are linguists as well, so...
I was just flashing to that scene in Bananas, by the way, when he's in bed with the girl, the one who played Mary Hartman, and she says, "Speak to me in French."
French, yeah.
Right? He goes, "How about Hebrew?"
Right. I remember it. It's hilarious. Just hilarious. It's just hilarious.
All right, so you've come to this country, you're fleeing the apartheid government, you have $100 in your pocket, you've just got out of the military, you've now taught some language, you know,
Yeah, actually, I went via Israel.
You got your education.
Whatever. I got via Israel, via other parts of Europe, and settled. Met a woman, landed up coming to New York, and finished my degree and my master's degree at the Cranbrook Art Academy in Michigan, which is quite a remarkable place. I didn't realize at the time to even have been considered for that academy was such a big deal. But I got in. You know, it was sort of one of these and then you realize afterwards, I mean, there were 150 students accepted to study at that place. And I was one of two in my department.
Did you think you were on your way to a career as an artist?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a silly question, but yeah.
I thought I would be. And I thought at some point I would probably teach, which is something that's cropping up now.
Yeah.
I've been invited to be, a guest professor at a couple of places. But yeah, I came to New York. I had a studio for shows and sold art and, built up a little collector base. And
so at what point did you become an art dealer?
So when did I become an art dealer?
When did you become an art dealer?
So I realized very soon after having children that having a studio in Brooklyn, while in and of itself was a remarkable thing to do, to have a studio in Dumbo, that I would need to make some money. And I got a fantastic job with a company called the Great American Salvage Company, which doesn't exist any longer, where we would go into buildings and we would take, anything from mantelpieces to old bathtubs to gargoyles off the front of the building before it got demolished. And the guys who started this business had a marvelous business of, pulling all these beautiful artifacts, real art, architectural art, into one central space, and then resell it either to restore something, or it was very much in vogue at the time where decorators and designers would come and find little bits and pieces of New York City and incorporate, those elements into new design. I developed a whole division for the company where we took our architectural artifacts and built furniture out of it. So it was fun, and it addressed my sculptural abilities and my own creative stuff. But there was a partnership issue, as there so often can be. And the business went under. And I figured, you know what, I know how to sell, I know how to deal with people. I'm going to look for a gallery position. And I remember my wife coming home one night saying, there's a company that's looking for someone to be in a gallery in the South Street Seaport. And I went down and I had the interview and we had a really lovely chat. And this is really in the late 80s, I would say, at this point. And
this is really in the heat of it then.
Yeah, very much so. When all the big chains of galleries existed and had gone public, and talk about what was the word we used? The racket. You know?
But it was also in the 80s when this was in fashion.
It was. And I remember having a wonderful interview with someone saying, no, I don't think we want you to be the director of the gallery at the South Street Seaport. We want to bring you to our flagship gallery so we can train you to do bigger and better things. And one thing led to another, and I worked for them for a number of years, and I became the director of another organization that shall remain unnamed. And then the opportunity, when that organization went belly up at its time, the only profitable center was the one that I was running, or one of the only profitable centers was the one I was running. It made sense at that point to consider the notion of, like, should we do our own thing? And I had a partner at the time, and we went into it. In 1997, we opened Pop International Galleries.
But that was a big decision.
It was a huge decision because I had no money. I mean, I was making a living, supporting a family and children and the whole thing. But I didn't come from money, and I didn't have money, so I had to scrape money together and borrow money.
But at that point, you have to kind of make a choice. Am I staying in the business? Am I going to work for someone else? If I go to work with someone else, what's going to look like? One of those options being to now get yourself into a 25-year lease.
Well, I was young enough and stupid enough, And so, we looked around and found places, and we've been in this location since the day we opened, and found this location. I remember looking at it, pulling my former business partner into it, and he sort of looked and said, "This is a mess. We can never fix this up." And here we are, almost 20 years later.
Well, almost 20 years later, what do you think's changed the most?
So I think that the business has shifted dramatically over 20 years because of the internet, no question at all. I think we were probably one of the first galleries to actually have email. I was very much forceful about being sort of ahead of the game to some degree. I mean, I remember at the Great American Salvage Company, we had a Polaroid camera, and we used to take pictures of things and then pop them in the mail.
I worked at a gallery where we would have copies made at a 1 hour lab, crazy.
That's what we would do as well.
We would with glue stick, attach
on a letterhead,
attach it to black paper.
Yeah,
and
yeah, we did that. We did that. So when email became a real potential, I said, we're going to get email. I think we had an AOL account at something or whatever it was at the time. But eventually we got our own mail server, and we developed a website and things. I think the electronic, this whole cyber world has been the most dramatically changing thing. Has the market shifted? Well, there have been, as we said earlier in this conversation, 9/11 and the crash of 2008, and I think there's another one coming, frankly, that there are things that affect the business, that could make it loopy or bumpy or whatever it is. But the most profound change, I really believe, is the cyber sort of ability to sell art to people through email that you've met, or that kind of thing. The other thing that we do, because we're sort of this gallery that really targets this middle market, is we make things accessible. We have layaway programs. We have a system where you could buy a piece of art over 12 months and around Christmas time over 18 months interest-free. Most galleries don't do that, and we use that a lot. People love it, especially younger collectors.
Well, I like that version a lot, actually. I was always very uncomfortable, when the credit plans started showing up in galleries. We even had specific credit cards for the gallery, or you'd call up to get the client financed. And I just always had this feeling that if someone needs to get a new credit line to purchase something, it just doesn't seem right.
Well, we found it worked really well for us.
Yeah.
Because
I know it's very effective.
It's very effective.
It just always made me uncomfortable.
It has never made me uncomfortable because it allows, for example, a younger collector who we want to nurture along, right? Our sort of game plan, our raison d'etre, whatever you want to call it, was not to have one-off sales. We wanted to have people build collections. We wanted to help people grow meaningful collections, and whatever that means. What's a meaningful collection? Who the artist is, what you pay for it, so on and so forth. And helping a younger collector who was really interested in collecting art, having what we call our little pop card, has been very, very useful and very helpful and very meaningful, and has allowed people over the years to continue to buy art. So, you sort of find tools. That's really what it is in the end. You find all kinds of tools and applications and methods, and, a very big thing for us is training salespeople.
I think that's one of the biggest parts of our business.
If not anything, it's the key.
And I think that's usually where most galleries fail, in my opinion. And usually not because they're not training them, but because in many cases, the people who own the galleries, who would be responsible for that, never got indoctrinated into it themselves.
Well,
and it is a tradition.
I can tell you that people like you and I, who came up through the systems that we did, went through some pretty significant training. I know I did.
I definitely did too.
And I have now developed subsequently over the years that we've been in business, I have a sales training manual that's, 60 pages deep. And when new people come on, we go through that manual, and we have sales meetings regularly, and we pull up, aspects of the manual, like how to deal with this and how to help with that, and how to qualify people properly, and sales. We're in the sales game.
The big part of it was just the real mentoring.
Right.
And it was observing it being done.
So
it was almost like you had to apprentice it.
Correct.
I've often said, I don't think I really could confidently know what this job was or knew what this job was until I had seen a presentation given a couple hundred times.
Right. And I have to say that having worked for some big gallery organizations prior to opening this one, there were a couple of individuals that I watched, and I was blown away by what they did and how they did it. And then of course, I've always maintained that as a sales trainer, that you have to train
in a positive way, you meant.
Oh yes.
Yeah, okay.
Is to help people find their own sort of way.
Yeah.
To find the best part of it about it that suits their personality and yet doesn't sort of, lose focus on what you need to do in order to make a sale. Because in the end, we are selling things, and I'm proud to be a salesperson. And, a lot of people I've noticed over the years, people that have come in don't like to be called salespeople. Well, we are salespeople. And there's nothing wrong with being a salesperson. We live in a country that is what's it called again?
Well, I think it's only a negative. It's only a pejorative word when it's been skirted.
Correct.
Then you stigmatize it by avoiding it, and once you stigmatize it, then you make it something that.
So the word sales in this company has always been a positive word.
Mm-hmm.
I like to see one of my sales consultants, when they're getting a deal, strutting down that long gallery floor to come and get an invoice to fill out, because I know what that feels like. I still get teased when I make a sale, which is, I defer most of everything to the people who work for us. But there is an occasion, an old client or something, I still have that feeling. And I feel myself strutting down, the gallery floor to go get an invoice to fill out and do what it is that we do. But
I just had that experience in its own way, not more than a couple of days ago.
Well, it is.
Where, I don't get to deal with collectors all the time, very rarely actually, but I got to deal with one on the phone that a gallery's selling a big painting to, and they were way off track with the person. And I knew exactly who that customer was, and I got to have one of those, I call it, the collar grabbing kind of conversations where you just go like, buddy, you just got to listen to me here. And
you finish, you go, yes,
but also first you have to earn it. You have to earn that relationship, and then you got to connect with the person while you earn it, and then give you the right to make your bold statement and kind of take them by the arm and say, look,
this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about listening here
Uh-huh.
In our gallery. I mean, if you listen to what people are saying, you keep your mouth shut,
mm-hmm.
And then address what they're saying, qualify them properly, overcome their objections. There's no reason not to make a sale, and there's no reason not to be. I'm going to share something with you.
Please.
A number of years ago, a young guy who I'd seen on the street came to me and he said, I would really love to work for you. And I said, really, what do you do? He said, well, I'm a babysitter and I work in a restaurant as when they meet people, what do you call them? A host. As a host. And I said, look, I like your appearance, I like your energy, I like your enthusiasm. I'm willing to give you an internship here for a little while. I'll buy you lunch every day. You'll participate in everything that we do. You'll learn everything about what we do, and then we'll talk about what you really want to do. This kid, he wasn't really so young, so he came to intern for me, and he learned everything. He made it a point to find out where every piece was in the back room. He learned about our inventory. He learned about our operation systems. He learned how to hang he can hang a gallery better than I've seen anybody hang a gallery in a very, very long time. He really poured his heart and soul into this internship. And then he came to me and he said, okay, Boss. He used to call me boss. How about something else now? What do you think? Do you think I'd like earn my internship thing? I said, okay, you can have a part-time job as a gallery aide, and I'll pay you hourly, which will mean lots of things. It'll mean packing and shipping and doing all kinds of things. And he jumped on it. Like, this guy was like dead set. I started to talk a little bit more with him, and I wanted to know what he wanted to do. And he said, I really want to be an art consultant. I said, okay, you got it. And today, Michael is our #1 selling art consultant in this gallery. And yesterday, we celebrated a number that he had hit, which is a golden number that every art consultant dreams of hitting.
In collective sales, or
in sales in a month?
In a month, okay.
And what that could represent in a year, and what that could represent as a salary and all that stuff, you know, if you can maintain that kind of level of selling. And it was, I put it down to two things: a really motivated young person who was mentored properly. And I get texts from him now and then. Hey, I just want to tell you how much I love working with you. Hey, you're the greatest boss I've ever had. Hey, thanks for letting me work at Pop. And I said, you can take your nose out of my butt now. Just come to work and make some sales, okay? But it is true. It was about being trained properly. It was about being mentored properly. It was about understanding the corporate culture, our corporate culture. And it was about having some natural talent that got nurtured and shaped. And I'm very proud of him.
Hey, it's Danny, and I am very sorry that I ended that a little bit abruptly, but there's a reason for that. It might have sounded like I ended it before it was done, and you're right. I ended it before it was done. There's more. We're going to turn this into a 2-part episode. That was a great conversation I had with Jeff. We got so much wonderful stuff out of it. We got everything out of it that I hoped I would be able to bring you in these conversations. Not just wisdom, not just some great tips and tricks and some wonderful perspective on the field that we're in, and those are not, unimportant. They are very important. But also an opportunity to introduce another art-selling professional to you. An opportunity for us to all get to know each other better. And like I said in that introduction episode I did called 00, if you want to go back and listen to it, I think it's worth it, understanding what we got going on here. Like I said then, I want this to be a place where we could have an honest and raw conversation about where we are, where we're coming from, and where we're going. And I don't think that's going to happen if I tidy these up too much. I could make this like an NPR-style piece. I can go into my audio editing software and clean it up 1,000 times and just get down to the gold. But that wouldn't be what it's supposed to be. This has got to be, as I said, it's got to be honest. I'm going to use that word a lot, so forgive me if I exhaust it after a while, but it's just the best one that I can come up with for what we're shooting for. You may have noticed that we changed locations here, and you would be right. We are no longer in my office on top of a hill in San Francisco. We are in a location a little bit more casual than that, and there's a reason for it. When I began this podcast, and I say it like we're 100 episodes in, I mean when I began it in my mind, thinking out what it would become as it's been developed, I gave some thought not only to the kind of conversations that I would hope we would have, and what they would do and what they would produce, but also where they take place. And only one thing kept on coming back and back and back, and that was that little bar around the corner from the gallery. The one that, after we said goodbye to the last clients, the one that after we've shut off the lights, armed the alarm, locked the door, that we slipped away to, just for a quick break, just a little space in between finishing our day selling art to people and going back to rejoin with our husbands and wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, or just a wonderful pet dog or cat. A place where we can decompress, where We got to talk about the day that we just had and the people that we met, the sales that we made or didn't make, whatever it would be. Discuss, the things we want to do more of and less of, or even get a little bit deeper and talk about who we are as individuals, where we came from and how we got here. Exact same conversations we're trying to get out of this podcast. That's the bar I want to be for all of us. Wherever it is that your gallery is located, or your office, your auction house, or whatever it is you work out of when you do this shared thing of selling art one way or the other, wherever that place is, I want this to be still just a half a block away from that place. I want this to be the place that every 2 weeks, as we come back with a regular podcast episode, that you can slide into along with everybody else. Pull up a chair, order up a cocktail at the bar, sit down and join me in that back corner booth, eavesdrop on what is a fantastic conversation with another art dealer, another art selling professional, but also maybe join in yourself at some time or another, either through a comment you send to us or maybe even being a guest on the show itself. I want this to be our watering hole for the business of selling art. I don't know what to call that place just yet. Making up a name of your own. But whatever it is, I hope to see you back here in 2 weeks with a cocktail in hand and a story to tell. This has been The Art Dealer Show. Come visit us at artdealer.show.